Morning all, hope everyone's well. Just a quick ad break if nobody objects too much, because I've got some books to sell. For anybody who doesn't realise, my background in motorcycle travel stems from me riding this machine here from Sydney to London and then from New York to Alaska. So it's a Honda CT 110. It's an ex-Australian postal bike. The postal service used them for a couple of years to deliver the mail, then retire them off, sell them through auction, at which point you can buy one as a regular rider and then do whatever you want with it. And in this case, I got this one second hand and then rode it back from Australia. So that was a 23,000 mile trip, and then got it to England and rode it from a few years later, shipped it, air freighted it into New York and rode it up to Alaska. So I've got two books, Sydney-London trip book and then the New York to Alaska trip book. And actually the third book is a children's adaptation of the Sydney to London trip that I wrote during lockdown as a bit of a lockdown project. So I've not printed any for about 3 years. I've just got some on their way from Poland where I have them printed. And yeah, I just thought they might make a decent Christmas present or just something to read during the long winter months. But essentially, you know, this bike took me around the world, or certainly across the world. And people might say, why this bike? Why something small and cheap and practical? But I guess that answers the question. It's cheap, practical, light, easy to get tyres for, easy to work on. It reduces a lot of the costs involved with a long distance trip, whether it's your carnet de passage or your air freight or your sea freight, your component parts, your tyre parts, you know, even tyres. I could get tyres for this bike, it's the same size front and rear tyre for about $3 or $4 on any street corner in Indonesia. If you're on, say, a GS12 and you needed a set of tyres for that bike in Indonesia, you'd probably have to have them shipped over. Certainly when I did this trip back in 2009, when there wasn't the availability of big bikes in the Far East, you'd have had to have tyres shipped in and it would have cost a lot of money. So there were so many benefits to doing a big trip on this bike. Would I do the trip again on something as small as this? Probably not. I'd probably go with something a bit smaller. But what it certainly did was cement my passion and preference for something small, cheap and manageable when you're going out your comfort zone, because that gives you confidence. It doesn't rob you of confidence, it actually gives you confidence, knowing that you can take that bike into an off-the-grid situation, and if it goes wrong or starts to go wrong, you can turn it around, you can get back out, and the bike's kind of on your side. So it really did create the foundation for, I guess, everything I say today, really, whether it's in support of the Himalayan or the Vogue or the CRF or whatever in this lower end of the category, lower end of the motorcycle market, just because I've got experience in how good this lower end of the market can be and what kind of adventures it can take you on. The Sydney to London trip, I did that after 2.5 days of planning, so it was a very impromptu trip. It was a reaction to not being allowed to stay in Australia, not being in any way in a hurry to get home to England. So I thought, well, I've got a bike. I've got a vague idea of how I could ride overland from Sydney to London. I had the energy to do it. It was a failed relationship I was in. I had the anger and the frustration of that, and that sort of propelled me forward, thinking, well, I'll push all that in. I'll channel all that into miles on the road, and that's exactly what I did. So 2.5 days after deciding to do it, I set off out of Sydney, and I kind of made it up as I went along. It took me 9 months. I just ate whatever I could find. I camped either sometimes in hostels, sometimes in a tent sort of by the side of the road or in fields that I found. So it was a very basic way of travelling, trying to do it on as cheap a budget as I could, because there was a point in which that every pound I spent was another pound on the credit card, which is not always the best way of travelling. But you know, in life, sometimes an opportunity presents itself, a once in a lifetime opportunity, which that was, when you just have to make a way of making it happen, however that may be. And you know, if you have to accept that you're going to get home in a fair bit of debt, then so be it. When else will you get a chance to do it? I mean, fortunately, on that trip, midway through in India, an Australian book publisher had seen what I was up to. They'd seen a little snippet in one of the local papers. I was sending postcards to the local papers in Australia and England, just trying to get a bit of coverage to try and generate a bit of money. And the publishing house in Australia saw it, and they commissioned me to write a book when I got home. So when I got home, I spent 9 months writing The Long Ride Home, or Going Postal as it was called in Australia. And I've got to be honest, writing a book is as daunting and as challenging and arduous as actually doing the trip itself. If anybody's thinking about writing a book, you've got two two directions to go in. You can either portray a make-believe version of reality, which is the version of reality you want people to see, which you think is what people want to read, or you can go down the other path, which is trying to scrape out the absolute truth of the situation and analyse, scrutinise and probe every strand of motive and emotional roller coaster of a ride that you've been on, and trying to get to some element of truth. And I suppose that's the route that I went down for Sydney to London. And then at the end of that book writing process, I had a bit of time just to try and make sense of the world. And then when I didn't quite manage that, I put the bike on a plane to New York, and I set off across America with 500 quid in the bank, and again, lived cheap, slept wherever I could, and made it to San Francisco, and then went up to Alaska, where I finally realised I'd had enough of riding a small bike around the world. And I came home and I wrote the second part of the story, which is Running Towards the Light, Postcards from Alaska, which is a slightly different kind of tale to the Sydney to London one, but still has meaning to me, and I think that's all you can ask for in your own book. Does it mean something to you? Yes, well, then it's a success, irrespective of what anybody else makes of it. And as I say, the third book came about from lockdown, you know, that frustration of not being able to go about your daily business and conduct your commercial affairs. So I sat in here and wrote a children's adaptation of Sydney to London. So that's the journey I've been on to reach this point, which I know not everyone is aware of, but I started out in motorcycle travel by riding a small bike a bloody long way and living to tell the tale. And I've got nothing but, mixed emotions. At times you kind of look back and think, that was a stupid, long, protracted thing to do, and then other times you think, wow, that was absolutely phenomenal. When you look at photos such as that, where the bike's parked up at Monument Valley and you're camping nearby that night, and yeah, you're out in the world living the dream, really. You know, no one knows where you are. You're just roaming. You know, it's almost pure existence, if I can sort of coin a cheesy phrase. But yeah, it's being a human stripped bare of any comfort of everyday living, and you're just out on the road doing what you need to do to survive and to make a step forward every day. So it's a very simple way of living, very different to the real world back home, where you've got bills and emails and relatives and in-laws and obligations. You know, on the road, the obligation is to move forward, which is a very pure and simple task. Whether it's difficult or not to move forward, the task of it is very straightforward. Just get up and chop wood. I always refer to it as like chopping wood. You get up, you just move forward, however you can do it. But it's a very linear, simple process, and sometimes our minds need that for a bit of cleansing. So that's it. I've got 300 books on their way of each, 300 copies of each. If you want one, go on the website www.dorothyspeedshop.com, and you'll be able to order them from there. Dorothy, by the way, this is Dorothy. This is the name given to the bike by the previous owner, Colin, who'd ridden her around the outback and named the bike after his favourite character from A Wizard of Oz. So when I picked up this bike, he said, and this is Dorothy. And that name sort of stuck, and that name has lived with me and created the Speed Shop. So that's the story of Dorothy. But yes, long distances on small bikes, certainly achievable, sometimes enjoyable. So I'll leave it at that. All right, cheers. Bye.